These days, we're inundated with new, terrifying headlines on a regular basis, including a landmark report from the United Nations Panel on Climate Change just last fall that contained some devastating conclusions.
The scientists found that if greenhouse gas emissions continue at the current rate, we could start seeing worsening food shortages and wildfires and a mass die-off.
Is a Green New Deal necessary? I wanted to create a video dealing with this subject matter and give it a full and fair analysis. Now, a lot of times when you hear about things like climate change or automation from the news media, they want to try and scare you or intimidate you regarding these subjects. And I'm not going to be doing that in this video. I'm not going to try and scare you. I'm not going to try and bully you or intimidate you. I'm just going to give a fair analysis of whether the Green New Deal is a good idea and whether it's necessary. The first thing I want to say about the Green New Deal is it seems that it's focused on two very worthy goals. The first goal is to provide employment to workers who have lost their jobs due to automation. Is this a legitimate goal? Well, what I can tell you is that the number one occupation of men with just a high school degree is a truck driver. When self-driving cars become a thing, which it's looking more and more inevitable each year, all of these people are going to lose their job. New developments in artificial intelligence might make many other jobs also obsolete. If machines and algorithms are able to take the place of human labor, then it makes sense that human labor increasingly would be worth less and less. Now, there are people out there who are more optimistic than I am when it comes to the prospect of automation eliminating people's jobs. These are the people who say things, for example, that automation will actually create more jobs than it destroys. I myself am very skeptical of this type of optimism. The reason being is that you heard the same things from all of the people who championed globalism and offshoring of manufacturing jobs back in the 80s and 90s. The people who defended the practice of offshoring indicated that the movement of these jobs to other countries would not displace American workers. These workers were supposed to be able to find other jobs that were just as good as the manufacturing jobs they lost. Obviously, that turned out not to be true. There were new jobs created by globalism and offshoring, but they were low-paying service jobs. Moving jobs offshore is not exactly the same thing as automation, and that there's no reason to believe that necessarily they'll play out the same way. I think that's a fair point to make, and there may be some value on waiting to see what happens. Maybe this problem doesn't yet need a solution. Maybe we should wait and find out if automation actually does end up destroying all of these jobs. However, that doesn't change the fact that the prospect of that happening still exists. There at the very least needs to be a contingency plan in place that we can use in the event that a massive number of people lose their jobs due to automation. Therefore, I think it's fair for people to propose and advocate for some sort of jobs program, at least on a contingency basis, to deal with the problem of automation displacing workers. So what about the other goal of the Green New Deal? To deal with the issue of global warming. It cannot be denied that ever since the world used energy sources that have produced greenhouse gases, that global temperatures have risen every year. Now, nobody can predict exactly what sort of effects this rise in temperatures will have over time to Earth's environment, into the various ecological systems that exist around the world. However, it is exactly that sort of unpredictability that makes global warming into such a problem and such a concern. In my view, the most frightening piece of journalism that's been produced on the possible effects of global warming was an article that appeared in the New York Times, I believe last year, that discussed the fact that a growing number of entomologists are increasingly under the opinion that a mass extinction of insects is occurring across the planet. Of course, the New York Times, a very biased news publication, suggests that global warming is the cause of this problem. I myself have a couple concerns with this article, in the conclusion it draws, however. First of all, the mass extinction of insects suggested by this article might not even be caused by global warming at all. It could in fact be caused by all of the pesticides used by the agricultural industries across our planet. It also isn't very clear to me whether the conclusion of this article is that insect populations across the world are being reduced, as opposed to just those populations that exist within suburban or urban areas that happen to be populated by a lot of human beings. Because if it's the latter, then it's really not as concerning as the New York Times is making it out to be. However, the mass extinction of species and the disruption of certain ecological systems in certain parts of the world are exactly the sort of unpredictable concerns that people worry about when it comes to global warming. And those are valid concerns. In addition, there's the much more talked about prospect of global warming causing the melting of polar ice caps, resulting in rising sea levels. Now, I find these claims to be a lot more speculative. However, nonetheless, I do think they are legitimate concerns. So going back to the Green New Deal, it appears to have worthy goals. It's worthy to want some sort of jobs program that helps protect workers who have been displaced due to automation. It's also a worthy goal to try and stop global warming. So do we need a Green New Deal then? The reality is that the Green New Deal is a terrible idea. The proposal of the Green New Deal is to create a single government project that is going to pursue both of these goals. The project is supposed to employ all of these displaced workers, while at the same time it's supposed to make efforts to stop the issue of global warming. The problem with a project like this is those goals are inevitably going to conflict with each other to a huge degree. Let's focus first on the goal of employing displaced workers. Well, if your goal of your project is to employ a bunch of people, your project cannot also be given the goal to solve a specific problem. It creates a conflict of interest. So if the project goes forward and happens to successfully solve this problem, if it ends global warming, well then what's going to happen to all of these workers that are employed by the project? In fact, if your real goal is to employ a bunch of people indefinitely to protect them from the effects that automation has had, you have every incentive not to solve the other problem you're tasked with resolving. Now, what sort of workers are going to be displaced by automation? Well, it's going to be truck drivers, retail employees, people in positions that artificial intelligence and automation are going to be able to replace. So are we supposed to take all of these displaced retail workers and truck drivers and have them build wind turbines or solar panels? No, they're not going to be able to do that. They don't have the scientific knowledge or the engineering experience to be able to do something like this. And before anyone suggests that we simply retrain these workers, it's not that simple. Being a scientist or an engineer requires a certain level of cognitive ability to be able to understand the math and scientific concepts that underlie these disciplines. You're not going to be able to simply retrain most truck drivers to be engineers. The type of workers that are going to be needed to build wind turbines or solar panels are going to be scientists and engineers, who are the types of workers who are unlikely to have their jobs replaced by automation. When FDR passed his New Deal and he created agencies such as the WPA, it employed workers and had them work on projects like building sidewalks, building infrastructure to be used for public buildings, building bridges. These are the sorts of projects that you could take unemployed truck drivers and have them perform. However, they're not going to be able to perform advanced engineering or other sort of scientific projects that would be needed to address a problem like global warming. Now let's look at the issues with the Green New Deal from the prospect of solving the issue of global warming. If you want to stop global warming, it's probably not efficient to employ a bunch of workers who have been displaced by automation. Rather than employing all of these people, you might get better reductions of greenhouse gas emissions if you instead use the money you would spend on their wages on obtaining materials and scientists and engineers who can use those materials to make things that are actually successful at resolving this problem. In fact, using automation might be a much faster and more efficient way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions than employing a bunch of workers who have been displaced. That's why the goals of a Green New Deal are inherently contradictory. It's why a Green New Deal is a terrible idea, even if it does have two very worthy goals. The Green New Deal is profoundly bad policy. So what could the government do instead that would actually solve these problems? Well, let's start with the issue of workers being displaced by automation. The first solution that the government could apply to this is very simple. You take the Green New Deal and you remove the green part of it. Just have it be a new deal like FDR's New Deal. In the city that I live in, which is, I believe, representative of the United States in general, there are major issues with our local governments. If you go to the public schools, the classroom sizes are far too large. The school staffs are overworked. If there were a large government jobs program, we could have more teachers. We could put more people into the schools and we could have smaller classrooms. A jobs program could also devote more resources to other areas of our local government. I'm sure that my city, as well as most cities, would benefit from additional police officers, additional probation officers, additional staff to assist prisoners leaving prison to make sure that they set off on the right path and don't end up back in prison. These are all things that could be accomplished with a job program. In addition to this, I could come up with an immeasurable number of things that a bunch of unskilled workers could do in order to improve my city. And I'm sure other people could come up with the same number of things that they could do to improve any community in the United States. Examples of things that you could use workers in a job program to do to improve the public sector might include things like planting more trees around public sidewalks so there's shade, building pedestrian bridges so people can quickly get around without having to wait at intersections, building more parks for children to play in, creating artwork that could be displayed in public spaces, rebuilding and updating infrastructure that already exists in the United States, building hiking trails around that people could enjoy. I could sit here all day long and think of things that the public sector could do to improve the local community here. Another potential solution to this problem is to do something like Andrew Yang's proposed freedom dividend. Now, I personally am more in favor of something like a jobs program because it gives people the ability to contribute to their local community in exchange for public funds. But Andrew Yang's proposal does have some really great things going for it. The beauty of what Andrew Yang's proposing is its simplicity. Every person simply gets $1,000 a month, regardless of their income. This is a much better proposal to dealing with the issue of poverty or displaced workers than our current welfare system, because our current welfare system traps people in poverty. In the United States today, if you end up impoverished and you end up applying for welfare benefits, you'll be stuck in a situation where if your income level goes up, for example, you're offered a higher paying position or you get more work hours at your job, then you're potentially going to lose your welfare benefits. For this reason, a large majority of people on welfare actively avoid taking steps that would improve their lives and rise them out of poverty. They deliberately seek out part-time positions that pay them a low amount of money so that they can keep all of their welfare benefits. Andrew Yang's proposal is much better than this system because you get $1,000 regardless of how much money you make. So an individual person always has the incentive to make more money, to work more hours, to rise themselves out of poverty. In fact, I would say the current status quo welfare system that we have in the United States is so backwards and devastating to poor Americans, it baffles my mind how it's been permitted to exist in its current state for so many years. Now, we've talked about the issue of displaced workers. What about the issue of global warming? How could the government effectively solve this problem? Well, I think the most promising solution to this problem would be with genetically engineered crops. If you look at most agricultural products that we consume today, like apples, bananas, ears of corn, you would find that they are Frankenstein enlarged versions of what originally existed in the wild before human beings domesticated the agricultural product. For example, when Europeans first traveled to North America and found the Native Americans farming corn, an ear of corn was about the size of a human thumb. Obviously, corn today is the size of a human foot. Over time, farmers selectively breed their agricultural products to produce larger and larger fruits. The larger fruits are obviously more desirable because they have more calories and provide more nutrition. Now, what if the United States used the same technology, selective breeding, as well as modern technologies that allow genetic engineering, to, instead of enlarging the fruits of our agricultural products, to instead enlarge their roots? Plants draw carbon dioxide from our atmosphere in order to grow. And if you had a plant that was engineered to have a very large set of roots, then that would end up taking a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and place it underground in the root system. Therefore, we could combat global warming and even reset global warming back to the time before we started burning fossil fuels by trapping a lot of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere underneath the ground in the roots of our agricultural products. Now, I like this solution to global warming for several reasons. The first thing I really like about this solution is the amount of agricultural crops in existence at any given time in the planet is going to be linked to the human population. So if the human population grows or reduces, then therefore also the crops that they are going to be consuming is going to grow or reduce. So if we manage to correctly genetically engineer these crops, even if there are changes in the amount of human population, if human population grows and therefore fossil fuel consumption grows, the fact that the agricultural products will also increase will cover for this problem. So this would make this solution potentially sustainable no matter what happens regarding the US population. The climate will always remain at a steady place, even if we're still burning fossil fuels. Another thing that I really like about this solution is all of these roots underneath the ground, all of this trapped carbon dioxide, over time will eventually become oil. Utilizing this type of solution, we could effectively make oil into a renewable resource. The final thing I like about this solution is it doesn't just stop global warming. It has the potential, once again, if we genetically engineer the crops in the correct way, to actually reverse global warming and put the climate back to how it was before we started even burning these fossil fuels. Now, another solution to the issue of global warming is to replace our power infrastructure with nuclear fusion energy. Nuclear fusion energy has a couple of big advantages over traditional nuclear power. For one, it produces far more energy. So it's much more viable as a source of our power than nuclear fission power plants. Nuclear fusion power would also be far less dangerous. It would avoid the risk of something like a Chernobyl type disaster. Finally, a nuclear fusion power plant, in theory, would produce less nuclear waste than a traditional nuclear fission power plant. The disadvantages of nuclear fusion is that to this date, there's never been one built. Now, many scientists believe that we're not far off, that if several $billions were to be invested in building a nuclear fusion power plant, that is not unrealistic, that it could be viable. That being said, none have been built, so nobody knows for sure. It's also not clear how expensive it would be to replace all of the energy production in the world with nuclear fusion power. Its potential, it could be very costly to do so. Another disadvantage would be, in order to fully stop the effects of global warming, it would require us to switch from gasoline-powered vehicles to electric vehicles. Obviously, this has a lot of implications to the United States, where gas stations proliferate everywhere. A third thing that the government could do to combat global warming would be to send an aircraft up into the atmosphere in order to distribute aerosol. The aerosol would reflect a portion of sunlight, and this would end up having a cooling effect on Earth's atmosphere. It's even possible we could cool it to the point where the climate returned to how it was before we started burning fossil fuels. The advantage of something like this is it would be relatively cheap to do. It would only cost a couple few $1 billion, which is less than we spend on many public infrastructure projects. If the entire world chipped in to do something like this, it might not be expensive at all for any individual country. The downside of something like this is it's only a temporary solution. We would have to keep spraying this aerosol every year into the atmosphere in order to have the effect continue. That's because the aerosol over time will end up leaving the Earth's atmosphere and settling down on the surface of the planet. While not a permanent solution, this very well could be a cheap and effective way of keeping the Earth's climate at a steady level while something like the genetically modified crops or the nuclear fusion technology was developed and utilized. Once again, the Green New Deal is a profoundly bad public policy idea. It won't work because it has two different goals which are inevitably going to conflict with each other. Instead of a Green New Deal, there are much more effective options available to the United States or other countries to deal with the issues of displaced workers or deal with the issue of global warming. If you like this video and you're not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe.